Imagine spending your entire life in a wheelchair you don't need, swallowing pills for illnesses you don't have, waking up every morning inside a lie so complete you don't even know it's a lie. Your teeth are gone. Your hair is shaved off. A feeding tube runs into your stomach. You've been told your whole life that you are dying. From leukemia, from muscular dystrophy, from seizure disorders, from a dozen other diseases that doctors said you had because your mother told them you had. You have never been to a school dance. You have never had a friend your own age. You have never once been allowed to simply be a girl. And then one night, you meet someone online. A man from Wisconsin. A man who tells you he will do anything for you. Anything at all. And you believe him. On June 14th, 2015, that man walks into your house. Your mother wakes up from her sleep. In the darkness, she asks him 4 simple words. Who are you? He has one answer. I am death. And the most terrifying part? Nobody, not a single doctor, caseworker, or neighbor, ever stopped to ask if any of it was real. Until it was already too late. The house at 1923 East Volunteer Way in Springfield, Missouri, looked like a fairy tale. It was painted purple and yellow, Gypsy Rose's favorite colors. It had been built by Habitat for Humanity, specially donated to a mother and her sick daughter who had lost everything in Hurricane Katrina. Neighbors remembered them fondly. Dee Dee Blanchard was devoted, selfless, tireless. Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard had moved herself and young Gypsy from the New Orleans, Louisiana area to Springfield, Missouri in 2005 after Katrina. She claimed the storm had wiped out all of Gypsy's medical records, a convenient detail that allowed her to start fresh with a new story. And what a story it was. Gypsy Rose, she told everyone, was profoundly ill. She had leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, asthma. She needed a wheelchair to get around. She required a feeding tube. She had the cognitive development, Dee Dee claimed, of a young child, even as Gypsy grew into her teens and 20s. Charities donated, communities rallied, churches organized fundraisers. The Make-A-Wish Foundation got involved. Brad Paisley gave them backstage passes. Doctors performed procedures. And Gypsy Rose Blanchard went along with it, because she had never known anything else. What is now medically recognized as factitious disorder imposed on another, formerly called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, is a form of severe medical child abuse in which a caregiver fabricates, exaggerates, or actively induces illness in a person under their care. It is, at its core, a form of prolonged torture disguised as love. Experts who later reviewed the case believe Dee Dee's abuse of Gypsy began when she was just an infant. When Dee Dee told doctors Gypsy had sleep apnea shortly after birth. By the time Gypsy was 8 years old, she had been placed in a wheelchair permanently and told she had leukemia and muscular dystrophy. Doctors removed her salivary glands. They performed eye muscle surgery. They pulled her teeth. They prescribed seizure medications and anxiety drugs she had no medical reason to take. Gypsy Rose Blanchard could walk the entire time. She just didn't know she was allowed to. On June 14, 2015, A Facebook post appeared on Dee Dee Blanchard's own account. It read, "That bitch is dead," followed by another message, even more explicit, graphic enough that neighbors who saw it immediately called 911. Greene County Sheriff's deputies went to 1923 East Volunteer Way. Inside Dee Dee's bedroom, they found Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, 48 years old, lying face down in her bed. She had been stabbed multiple times. The house showed signs of a struggle. Gypsy Rose was nowhere to be found. Within days, investigators traced the Facebook posts and tracked the IP addresses. They found Gypsy Rose Blanchard, then 23 years old, though Dee Dee had told everyone she was a teenager, at the home of Nicholas Godejohn in Big Bend, Wisconsin. Both were arrested without incident. What police found when they ran Gypsy's medical history shook investigators to their core. She could walk. She had no muscular dystrophy. She had no leukemia. Her chromosome tests showed no abnormalities. The wheelchair, the feeding tube, the medications, the surgeries, all of it had been imposed on a healthy child by her own mother. Think about that for just a moment. And if you're watching this right now and you've followed this case before, drop in the comments, did you believe Gypsy was justified? Because this case has divided people for a decade. The plan had been in the making for months. Gypsy had met Nicholas Godejohn on a Christian dating website in October 2012. Because Dee Dee controlled every aspect of her daughter's life, her phone, her social media, her movements, they had to communicate in secret. Godejohn, then living in Big Bend, Wisconsin, became Gypsy's lifeline, her escape route, her one connection to a world outside the house on Volunteer Way. Over 3 years, Gypsy allegedly shared the full truth about her situation with Godejohn, and together they made a plan. On the night of June 14, 2015, Gypsy waited until Dee Dee fell asleep. Then she gave Godejohn a signal. She retrieved the knife from the kitchen. She handed it to him, and she told him, according to her own testimony, to go into her mother's bedroom. Then she went to the bathroom, and she waited. She heard screaming. In her own words, speaking on Paul C. Brunson's We Need to Talk podcast on June 9, 2026, Gypsy Rose recalled, "It was a horrible sound. It was screaming. It was shock." She believes she heard her mother ask, "Who are you?" and that Godejohn replied, "I am death." This exchange was later confirmed not just by Gypsy's recollection, but by Godejohn's own courtroom testimony and by conversations he had with fellow inmates, transcripts of which were reviewed in legal proceedings. After Dee Dee was dead, Godejohn came to the bathroom where Gypsy was waiting. He had cut his finger during the attack. He asked her to bandage his hand. He wanted an embrace. Gypsy, by her own account, was in a complete state of shock. Then they packed their things. Godejohn stole cash from the house. He mailed the murder weapon, the knife, to his home in Wisconsin, and the two of them boarded a bus and fled the state. The Facebook posts were meant to taunt. They were left live for nearly 24 hours before authorities arrived. Nobody had intervened. Nobody had come. And for a brief window of time, Gypsy Rose Blanchard believed she was finally, actually, free. Here's the question that has haunted this case for a decade. At what point does a victim become responsible for a crime committed in the name of their own survival? The medical record left behind by Dee Dee Blanchard reads like a document of systematic destruction. Beginning in infancy and continuing through Gypsy's early 20s, Dee Dee subjected her daughter to an estimated series of unnecessary medical procedures and interventions. Her salivary glands were surgically removed. Her eyes were operated on for a muscle condition she did not have. Her teeth were extracted. She was prescribed anti-epileptic drugs, including controlled substances, for seizures she did not experience. She was kept in a wheelchair for years, her leg muscles atrophying from disuse. She was fed through a tube implanted in her stomach. She wore an oxygen mask. She was made to appear to the outside world as a terminally fragile child. And psychologically, the damage ran even deeper. Gypsy Rose had been conditioned from birth to believe she was incapable of living without her mother. She had no formal education record, no peer relationships, no understanding of how the world worked beyond the walls of that purple and yellow house. Experts who studied the case concluded that Dee Dee Blanchard had subjected her daughter to one of the most prolonged and medically sophisticated cases of abuse in recent American history. Investigators also found evidence suggesting financial motivation. Dee Dee received charitable donations, disability assistance, a free home from Habitat for Humanity, and various medical subsidies, all built on the foundation of her daughter's fabricated illness. And throughout all of it, through every hospital visit, every charity fundraiser, every wheelchair ride, not one doctor, not one social worker, not one authority figure ever pressed hard enough to uncover the truth. In July 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, then 24 years old, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in Greene County, Missouri. Taking into account what prosecutors themselves described as extraordinary and unusual abuse, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She served approximately 85% of that sentence. On December 28, 2023, Gypsy Rose Blanchard walked out of the Chillicothe Correctional Center in Missouri, a free woman. Nicholas Godejohn took a dramatically different legal path. He was tried by a Greene County jury in November 2018 and convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He did not receive a plea deal. In February 2019, a judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years for armed criminal action to be served concurrently. He is currently incarcerated at the Potosi Correctional Center in Mineral Point, Missouri, approximately 72 miles south of St. Louis.
Godejohn has since filed appeals challenging his conviction on the grounds of ineffective assistance of counsel, arguing his legal team failed to adequately develop a diminished capacity defense rooted in his diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. As of the time of this video, those appeals are ongoing. His attorneys have argued he should have faced second-degree rather than first-degree murder charges, which would have carried the possibility of parole. It bears stating, as it must in any fair accounting, Nicholas Godejohn is a convicted murderer. Gypsy Rose Blanchard was convicted of second-degree murder. Both have been held legally accountable for the death of Claudine Blanchard. And now you've heard everything: the abuse, the planning, the night itself. But I want to ask you something before we close. If you think about the doctors who performed those surgeries on a healthy child, the charities who funded the lie, the neighbors who never questioned it, where does accountability begin and end? Tell me what you think in the comments. There is one question in this case that no verdict, no documentary, and no podcast appearance has ever fully answered. It is not, did Gypsy know what she was doing? It is not, was Nicholas Godejohn a willing killer or a manipulated tool? The question is this: how many people knew?
or suspected. Dee Dee Blanchard moved through the medical system for over 2 decades. Multiple hospitals across multiple states treated Gypsy for conditions that were never there. Social workers visited that purple house. Doctors signed off on procedures. People handed over money. Charities gave them gifts and wishes and support and a home. And somewhere in that vast ecosystem of care, was there a single person who paused and wondered? Because if there was, and they said nothing, then Dee Dee Blanchard was not the only one who failed that child. If this story taught us anything, it is that abuse does not always look like what we expect. Sometimes it wears the face of a devoted mother. Sometimes it smells like hospital antiseptic. Sometimes it sits in a charity-donated wheelchair in a purple house on a quiet Missouri street, and everyone around it calls it love. Gypsy Rose Blanchard is 34 years old today. She has a daughter named Aurora, born in December 2024. She says she wants her little girl to love her and forgive her. Nicholas Godejohn will spend the rest of his life inside Potosi Correctional Center, and Dee Dee Blanchard is buried in a cemetery in Louisiana, laid to rest beside a life's worth of secrets that took a murder to uncover. If this story moved you, if it made you angry or sad, or made you look differently at the world, share it. Someone needs to see it. And subscribe, because the stories we tell here don't let go of you easily. The last sound Dee Dee Blanchard ever heard was her own daughter's name leaving her lips. She called out for Gypsy, the one person she had controlled for 23 years, the one person she had made sure could never leave her. She never got an answer.